landscapes with watercolor pencils seems impossible, time-consuming, streaky, and frustrating, the technique I'm going to share with you is going to completely change the way you see them. It takes minimum effort, barely any time, and the tools I'll be using are affordable and easy to find at home. Hi, I'm Françoise. Welcome back to my channel, your resource for watercolor and watercolor pencil techniques that look loose and realistic all at once. Let's be honest. What makes a watercolor pencil landscape seem hard to even attempt comes down to two things. The first problem is that large areas feel overwhelming when you're stuck using the coloring technique because it takes forever and it's exhausting. Second problem, and a huge pet peeve for many of us, the streaks. You know, those annoying lines that remain even after activating the paint. On a cactus in a jar with no background like this one, fine. Although, let me tell you, I didn't even get any streaks thanks to the coloring method that I use. But on a calm sky or a lake, streaks aren't worth the risk. Unless you use the right strategy, and that is where the sandpaper technique comes in. It's quick, it's easy, and it even works with pencils that are very dry or just very low quality. And you don't need fancy supplies for that, just sandpaper. I usually go with grade 220 or 240, but anything close will do. This technique works on many papers too. Hot press, cold press, even thick drawing papers with a bit of texture. Just avoid anything that's too glossy because it wouldn't hold on to pigment that much. That said, for landscapes, I highly recommend cold press, 100% cotton paper with a weight of 300 grams per square meter because it gives the most even results and holds water better, which means that the art will look better and you won't have to deal with stains as much or the paper drying extremely fast. And why this technique is a true game changer is because it lets you block in all your main colors in just a few seconds. You just drop the pigment where you want it. Then take a paper towel and smudge the color. Circular motions will give you a nice even application with no streaks, and that's why that even works with the lowest quality pencils. You can finish with motions that follow what's going on in the reference. For example here, straight motion for skies and then a curved motion for hills or dunes. And don't forget to switch the side of the towel whenever you change colors. That way you avoid contaminating other parts of the painting. You can also layer colors on top with this technique, especially if your paper has some tooth to grab the pigment. I usually do what you see here. I overlap 2 or more colors to create beautiful gradients, and then once I have something satisfying for a base, I add dark tones where I want the shadows. And voila! Even before adding any water, your landscape has a smooth, finished base already. And we're not done with this technique. It'll be useful again later, so stick around. Now that we've created a beautiful background without any streaks, how do we activate it without messing it up? Activating watercolor pencils is actually easy, but I'm not gonna lie, it does take a bit of practice because it's easier than traditional watercolors, but it still dries fast enough that you'll need to be quick. With the right method though, you'll improve fast. Before we dive into those methods, if you'd like to paint along, I have this project and many others available on Patreon for a small monthly fee. There you can pick any tutorial from the growing library, or if you prefer structure and a single focus, my Skillshare classes are for you, and this brand new one here is ideal for today's technique. And for those who want to learn it all, every water-soluble and watercolor pencil technique, I created a full self-study course that you can start anytime. All of these learning options are on paintingandchocolate.com with all the info you might need, and I'll link them in the description below. Now back to activating the paint. Different methods give different results. You can use a flat brush or a spray bottle or both. So for example, for the sand dunes, I decide to just spray first to wet the bottom. Then for the sky, I go directly with a flat wet brush. You could spray the sky as well, then brush over. I just want to show you a few options. And you can experiment and see what you prefer. So using a flat brush dry on dry is great for smooth areas like calm skies or seas. It's super quick, but make sure to use enough water, not so much that you flood the paper, but enough to avoid patchy spots and activate faster. Whether you pre-wet that with a spray bottle or not, you also need to rinse your brush often, especially when transitioning between colors. The tricky thing with this method is that a little bit of back and forth might remain visible. So what I like to do is move my brush horizontally and then vertically. It really helps me get the smoothest look. And I've noticed too that this method works best on 100% cotton cold pressed paper since it does dry slower and more evenly than others. Now for the sand, spraying from a distance already helped the water spread evenly. Then this time I just smoothed things out with a smaller brush that fits the detail in that part of the painting. And I even pulled darker pigment into lighter areas to shape the dunes. You can even use the brush to lift color at this point and create highlights. I'm going to show you another way to activate later on with that technique, but first I want to show you how I screwed up a bit here. I wanted to smooth this out one more time with clear water after the initial background was dry, but I messed up my previous outcome and this left me with something less vibrant than before because of that added water. And I also lost some of the shapes that I had painted and it wasn't much smoother in fact. And I added that extra step for nothing. So my advice is to avoid going back over if your initial version looks good enough, which was the case actually with mine. But don't worry because with the sandpaper technique, we can improve this much faster and this time a little bit differently. Because now it's time for details and it's that stage where we're going to start refining things and tailor it to the reference of what we had in mind. Typically, at this point here, you'd want to work on contrast, so shadows and highlights, and you'd want to boost vibrancy if needed and maybe add a few crisp shapes. Depends on what you're painting, but usually in a landscape, we have all of that. So this is where the sandpaper technique shines again. Let's say you need some contrast or like me, you lost it. That happened in my sky and at the base of the sand dunes. So I just add more sanded indigo, I smudge it again, and then I spray water from far away so the pigment activates itself evenly. And that's where things are a bit different than what we did earlier, because since this is a second layer, we already have something underneath. So there's really no need to touch this new activated layer with a brush. And it looks great. Just that gave me a rich, deep blue, and again, so quickly. And if you want texture, you don't even need to activate it. You could just leave the sanded pigment as it is, and it will give you a nice greeny look. It's up to you. I've uploaded other videos here where I show exactly what that looks like. So when it comes to contrast, check. Next up is vibrancy. After activation, watercolor pencil colors always fade a bit. That's normal. So just like with shadows, you'll want to go back and brighten things up. And that's where the actual basic coloring technique comes in. But notice the big difference. We're not using coloring as the main technique, but as touch-ups instead. We use it to increase saturation, to redefine shapes, and boost shadows. And here I like to overlap colors, indigo on the edges, then dark red, then orange. It keeps the look natural and cohesive with a gradient from dark to light. I also colored carelessly at this stage because the base already did the heavy lifting. So just so you know, these pencils, the faber-castell Arbor Durer, do blend well, and on top of an existing base, streaks aren't an issue. I might not be that careless with any watercolor pencil, but all in all, I can tell you that streaks won't be as annoying when the coloring focuses on small areas of an already smooth background, so don't worry. When activating your colored areas, be careful though, because if you want to keep the pigment where you placed it, you're going to want to use a wet brush that's been blotted slightly. Start with the lightest areas first and work towards the darks. Rinse your brush often so you don't transfer pigment where you don't want it. I teach this pretty much in all of my videos here, in all my classes and courses, so if you need more examples, check some of it out. Lifting works just as well now as it did earlier. You can do it on wet like before or on dry. Just wet an area, press a dry paper towel onto it and lift. And that restores balance between the light, dark, and the midtones quickly and easily. And for the stars, just dip a white watercolor pencil lead into water, then you can press it against your sky. I would suggest to do it quickly and spontaneously. I find it to be the best strategy because you don't want all the stars the same size or spaced evenly. And if you're slow and concentrated, it will be very hard to help yourself. So do this very quickly. You can also press harder for big stars and lighter for small ones, since brusher also yields different results. And a wet lead also gives bright results, while a drier one will give you subtle sparkles. So there's so much you can do with watercolor pencils. You can see it with those techniques here, and that's why I love them so much. So please let me know below in the comments if you enjoyed this video. And there are plenty more on this channel. Here's actually the recent one I mentioned earlier, and I dive deep into the coloring technique with Inktense pencils. So thank you so much for watching and see you next time.